everybody, it's Ruby here today, and today I wanted to do the much anticipated video involving the giveaway and Q&A that I promised about 2 weeks ago. So I will do the questions first, and then I'll talk about the giveaway winners and sort of how I went about that process. I'm really excited about answering your guys' questions. There was a lot of very thought-provoking questions, which I shouldn't have been surprised by, but I was. And I'll try to make this as short as possible because there's a lot I'd like to get through. So let's get started. So the first person is Adriana, and there's a couple of questions here. So who or what inspired you to read? How did you start to read? It's like the first thing people in my family are taught when they're little is to value books and libraries and generally a lot of literature. I didn't like reading for the first little while of elementary school because I had an undiagnosed learning disability, which was indicated in my provincial achievement tests in grade 3, but we had moved away before we were able to get the feedback for that. So I wasn't really tested for anything until I was about 12 years old, and then I was tested again at 16. So I have some sort of learning disability. They think it's either dyslexia or ADHD. Probably leaning towards ADHD, but I wasn't given like an official label on it, just that I had certain traits that could be put under one of those two categories. So when I first started to read, of course, it was very difficult for me. It was very difficult for me, and still is, to read aloud. There's some sort of disconnect between what I read and understand and what I can express. So I was behind my grade level. The first novel I remember reading was Prisoner of Azkaban, which I don't remember actually understanding. It was one of those books where I read all the words, I understood them, but I probably couldn't explain the plot to you at the time. Then the movie came out and I realized how great the series was and was like, okay, no, I gotta get on this. I need to read the series. We moved away to a small town where there wasn't a whole lot to do other than going to school, watching TV, and reading books. And at the time, it was like an odd period of my life where I was about 9 years old, where there wasn't a lot of shows that would gear towards my age group that I was interested in. So I read a lot, and I basically taught myself how to read through Harry Potter. So they were sort of what got me into reading. Why have you chosen to study psychology? When I was about 11 or 12, I got into literary criticism. So it's a very fancy word for an English class or language arts where you read a book and you analyze it. And I found that analyzing the characters in the book were a lot like analyzing psychology. My parents were very adamant that I get into a subject that paid. They both had been went to university for things that didn't quite pan out. They went mostly for their interests and less so for any pragmatic reasons, and they didn't want me to go down the same route. So I found that the happy medium for me was psychology, because anything I read up on about psychology I was really interested in. And as I started to learn more and more about it, I realized that it was such a huge subject that I could take it as an undergrad and go into basically whatever I wanted to in graduate school. So for a while I wanted to do clinical psychology. I was very interested in Freud and Jung. I knew that they were discredited, but I was still interested in psychoanalysis. And then once I realized that that wasn't necessarily scientific anymore, I was still leaning towards counseling psychology until I discovered cognitive science, which I talk about regularly on this channel. Name a character in a book that you would like to chat and have coffee with. I find questions like these really difficult to answer because any character that I read and empathize with, I usually empathize with on a personal level. So usually there aren't characters where I'm like, I would really like to meet this person. It's more along the lines of, I really want to be this person. If I had to pick, I would probably pick like a Murakami character of some sort. They're always interesting. There's always a lot of depth in those people. I would really like to meet Snape from Harry Potter, just because I found that a lot of the characterization in it was based off of Harry's own biases as well as Snape's. So it's always interested me to see what Snape is like with someone who might be more sympathetic towards him, or maybe who's an adult instead of a child, because he tends to be quite bullying as a teacher. So I just wanted to kind of see what he would be like, because I realized that he is a caricature in a book, and he was still a professional professor in a school. So he would have had to have been at least a functional adult, and I wanted to see kind of what that would be like. Twilight Bizarre asked, I would like to know what book really made you realize that you like reading and motivated you to pick up more books or even try different genres. So this is kind of like what Adriana had asked. So Harry Potter was definitely the book that motivated me to start reading. I asked my dad what other books were like Harry Potter once I had finished the series and kind of exhausted anything I could from the books, because I definitely read them over and over and over again. So he picked out a lot of fantasy books for me, so Sword of Shannara, David Eddings, The Belgariad. I read A Series of Unfortunate Events, Tamora Pierce, so I guess a lot of fantasy, kind of magical realism. And then from there I read a lot of fan fiction, which is only really starting to come out in any sort of like literary analysis as anything that has any sort of quality. There's a lot of very good stories in fan fiction that I think people should have published beyond, you know, Cassandra Clare and 50 Shades of Grey. But that's a whole different thing altogether. I don't think I read any other sort of book until high school, where I was exposed to a lot more literature for the book lists that we had to read in English class, and from there I realized that a lot of the books that my high school teachers were recommending were books that I really liked. So I'd basically just take that list and explore things on my own, and sometimes I would just pick things out of the library and see what looked good. Literary Gladiators asked, what would you consider to be your favorite genre? I think that's a hard one, not because I don't know it, but because I think it's very hard to define. I like science fiction, soft science fiction. I like things that defamiliarize things that you have taken for granted. So looking at gender and twisting it around, like Self by Jan Martel, or Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. I like magical realism and surrealism like Murakami or At Swim Two Birds. And I like soft science fiction that like will explain concepts to you scientifically, but where that's not the main feature of the story. So instead of it being about space exploration or technology or computers, it's about how that influences our society. Revolute Sound asked, do you buy most of your books online or in B&M bookstores? I usually pick up most of the books that I have sort of waiting on my shelves from thrift stores and pawn shops that my dad and I visit. They tend to be very cheap, and they're usually books that are popular in the moment. So if there's a Heather's Picks or a book that has recently won an award, usually a lot of people will buy it, and within the year they'll return it to a pawn shop. And so that's usually where I get a lot of my general fiction. If there's a specific book that I want, I'll usually buy it online, either through a Chapter's online service where you can pick it up in one of their stores, or some place like Amazon.ca, or I think like there's like Book Outlet and stuff like that. Death Christ 2000 asked, have you read Alan Moore's last interview, and what do you think of it? I have not. I actually read this question and was like, I need to look this up, and then totally put this in a video and I forgot. So I'll have to get back to that. Valeron asked a couple of questions. What universities are you considering for grad school? If that's too personal / risky to say publicly, what country or area of a country would you like to study in? Dream school, realistic school, master's, PhD, future plans. I won't say the university that I would like to study in because I haven't applied for it yet, so I don't want to jinx it. I have told friends and family sort of what I'm interested in, but I feel like if I say something in a video, it's become confirmed and it's concrete when it obviously isn't. So I will tell you guys should I get into it, or if I get into a particular grad school, because I don't think that saying sort of the area of the world I live in is necessarily unsafe. I'm definitely looking for, I would like to go all the way up to a PhD. I really like academia and I'd like to stay in it as a professor or research assistant. or researcher in general. I really like cognitive science, especially embodied cognition, so I've been choosing universities in that area. The cities that I would like to go to are cities that I think I would be most comfortable in, so cities in Europe, Canada, and sort of the coasts of America, so west and east coast. Carriana TV asked, what were your favorite books of 2015? I realized that I didn't do a video on that, partially because I did disappear again at the beginning of the year, and I feel like I missed the boat on talking about it, so I'll just mention it briefly. I think all of these I was planning on doing a review for, some of which I will be doing soon. So I have At Swim Two Birds, which I did do a video on, so I can link that down below. The Golden Compass, which I mentioned briefly in a children's literature video, which I'll also link down below. I was going to do a full series review, but I'm not quite sure if I will or not, so you can comment down below if you'll be interested in that. Promethea, which I also did a review on, Stepford Wives, and House of Leaves, which I am planning to do reviews for really soon. It's one of the most important videos that I've been planning. House of Leaves, I'm actually going to do a review for after this video because I thought it was the best time to do, considering I'm giving away House of Leaves. Not this copy, but to prove it to you, I actually have it right here. Most of these books, I guess, are just, you can kind of tell that my interests in particular genres are all over the place, because you have like surrealism, magic realism, and fantasy, philosophy, sci-fi, and horror. So they're kind of all over the place. Most of these books, I guess, are just, you can kind of tell that my interests in particular genres are all over the place, because you have like surrealism, magic realism, and fantasy, philosophy, sci-fi, and horror. So they're kind of all over the place. I do read nonfiction. I find popular science books the most interesting. I was taught in one of my psychology research methods class that the best way to pick out a popular science book is to find someone who has the credentials in the area that they're talking about. So someone who is talking about social psychology should probably be doing research in social psychology, if not at least a degree in it. I usually look for someone who has a PhD. I think this is kind of elitist. I don't think you need a PhD to explain that sort of stuff, but usually it helps because you need to be a leading expert in the field to be able to summarize and encompass a whole bunch of research into a book for the masses. My favorite book, nonfiction book of all time, is Sex at Dawn, which I've mentioned in, I think I did a video on my favorite popular science books, which I'll also link down below, and it changed my mind on evolutionary psychology and evolution and anatomy. So it spun a lot of the theories on its head about what we assume to be correct about men and women and the caveman era, and sort of points to other evidence that was not included in the research until quite recently that changes your perspective on what could be in the past. I usually recommend it to people even if they don't if they won't necessarily like it, because it does give you sort of a different perspective on things. And also, do you have any reading goals for 2016? No, I do not. I am still in university. I'm in my last couple of semesters here. So my goal is to read all of the readings necessary for the class, and keep on top of that, and to talk to you guys about anything that I find interesting in those classes. I picked up If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler, which I've wanted to read for a while, and I've also started reading 1Q84 by Murakami. So those are books that are definitely on my to be read, but nothing specific. Ash the Avid Adventurer asks, my question is, what book world would you like to live in if you were given the opportunity? I don't think that a lot of the books that I read necessarily have worlds. Like I said about my favorite genre of books. I like the twists that are in science fiction where it's our world but not. And I don't think that any of those worlds that I like reading about, I would necessarily want to live in, because I think a lot of science fiction has the agenda of showing what's wrong with our world or what could happen. So I might like A Handmaid's Tale, but I definitely don't want to be a part of it, if that makes sense. Rogue has a couple of questions. So number 1, what are your favorite dystopian reads of 2015? I don't think that I have like specific, I don't read dystopian fiction specifically because it's dystopian fiction, which is why this question is sort of hard to reply to, but I would say Handmaid's Tale. Less so because of this dystopian fiction, but more so because it's about gender politics and it's written by Margaret Atwood. Second question, if in a near future we were only allowed to own a single book for every existing genre, which books would you keep? I would say House of Leaves for horror, Solaris for science fiction, Promethea for graphic novels, Harry Potter for children's literature, Murakami for general fiction, probably anything by him. I'd say 1Q84, but I haven't finished reading it yet, so I feel like I can't say that yet. Sword of Shannara for fantasy, Sex at Dawn for nonfiction. I literally don't read any romance, so I wouldn't keep anything for romance. Maybe War and Peace for historical fiction or history in general. Those are the only like big ones that I can think of for chapters. It's hard to think of that question because I think that there's a couple of different ways that you can answer it. I just picked my favorite genre of what I like now compared to what I've liked ever. And I think if I were to actually pick books, like if that were to actually happen, I'd pick like the biggest books ever, because then I could reread it, but those are just my favorites. Which are some underhyped books that more people should know of? Hidden gems? Okay, so the 3 hidden gems that I would recommend for anybody that are underhyped are is going to be S, or Ship of Theseus, by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. This is again the second of the giveaway for today. I think a lot of people know about this. A lot of people did buy it. It's been on BookTube quite a bit, but nobody I've talked to in the real world has actually read it. So it's less well known than it should be, considering how influential I think this book is. The Elegance of the Hedgehog. This was a book recommended to me by my English teacher in high school. It's about 2 people of different generations coming together in like a apartment building in France, and kind of about what they learn and a lot of philosophical discussions involved in that. I think it was written by a philosophy professor, so very pretentious but still very interesting. And Sophie's World, which is a novel about the history of philosophy. The main character, Sophie, is given letters and videos explaining the different areas of philosophy in the sort of easiest way to understand them possible. A lot of people who are interested in philosophy suggest this book because it's sort of more of an elementary way of looking at things while still being very thorough and I think very accurate. Alright, now as for the giveaway, it had been kind of confusing when I had explained it, but basically there were 2 books that I wanted to use as a giveaway, either S by Doug Dorst and J.J. Abrams, and or House of Leaves, which I consider to be probably some of the best books that I've ever read, the most conceptual and most interesting. So I wanted to give those away as part of like a representation of my BookTube channel. But I also was aware that not everybody would want both books, either because they weren't interested in them or because they owned 1 or 2. So I listed off everybody who indicated in the comments of my previous video that they had wanted to win one of the books. And what book they wanted to win, and then I listed the YouTube username and a number and used a number generator. So the first person that I got was Krina TV, who indicated House of Leaves. So I redid the number generator and also got Ariana, who I guess would be winning S. So if you happen to be reading this and you have won the giveaway, please email me at my.dusty.books@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll try and contact you through the YouTube email username Google Plus thing and see if I can find some sort of email that way. If I don't get into contact with you guys over the next week or something like that, then I will have to redo the giveaway, but I'm sure they'll find a way to do that. So that's really exciting. I'll ship them off as soon as I can, and thanks everybody else for participating and submitting questions. And thanks again for being awesome. So like, subscribe, do your thing if you're interested in this, and I will talk to you guys later.